What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions for Crimson Desert. I did not receive a review key for it, and so I have only started playing it now that it has officially released over on Steam anyway. And it must be said, I've been looking forward to this one, if not so much for the game itself, but simply just to see if they could fulfill a lot of the hype that had been building up around this particular title. It's a game that seems to be trying to do a million different things, and I am infinitely curious to see how well it actually manages to pull all of that stuff off. And yet, its initial reception does seem to be a little frostier than expected, but most of that seems to be coming down to some initial performance issues. I haven't really experienced too much of that myself. There were a couple of crashes, but they weren't the game. They were actually more about my recording software. But no major issues to report for me otherwise. But I will say it does feel a bit clunky to move around, like the finer details of your character movement when you're not, rushing through an open space are a little on the slow and awkward side, which can make moving through certain tighter areas kind of annoying. Which is a problem that I think is a little further compounded by the fact that I gotta say the default mouse and keyboard controls for this are pretty bad, to the point where I'm curious if the person who set them up had ever played a PC game with keyboard and mouse. But that stuff aside, in terms of just a game feel, I guess you could say, my closest comparison would probably be something like Breath of the Wild. I never played Tears of the Kingdom. That might be more relevant for people here, especially with all the floating stuff. However, after going back and forth on what this game was supposed to be, I actually have, I would say, a clearer picture now, because this feels so much like how Breath of the Wild played, albeit with more systems piled up on top. Now, before we dive into the rest of all of that, however, let's start from the beginning. So in this game, we primarily play as Cliff, a member of the Greymane tribe, who is subsequently attacked by the Black Bear tribe, and pretty much wiped out. You and a couple of survivors are all that is left, which is easy enough to follow, and then the story takes a very hard right turn, where the game kind of seems like it doesn't really care too much about making any sense after that. But after some convoluted back and forth, you find yourself talking to some strange people in an area known as the Abyss, who basically tell you that there is some chaotic force causing all the recent strife, and your job is to restore balance to the world as it happens. And they're going to help you by giving you some tools to do that, which are primarily going to let you manipulate and glide around and explore this world appropriately. In particular, a lot of movement-based abilities, and that is actually really interesting given the sort of initial clunkiness of your character's movement, only to have all of these different abilities that really seem to emphasize getting around the map. Now, I will say what little I've seen of the initial reviews were not kind to the main story, and I can already kind of see why, so my hopes aren't high for this getting better, but we'll see what happens with it. Now, when it comes to, progress and gameplay and everything, that's kind of interesting because progression seems relatively simple. It's basically items and things that you can refine and upgrade, which determine both your look and everything, but also the type of weaponry you're using. But in terms of actually getting stronger, what you're going to do is get a hold of artifacts. Now, artifacts come in a couple different types, but primarily the ones you can use immediately, and then sealed artifacts. Sealed artifacts have to be opened by completing challenges. Once you have the opened artifact, however, you can then spend it on your various skill trees. This is where you're going to do things like increase your health, stamina, all that stuff. And combined with story progression, you can also pick up a bunch of different moves to utilize in combat, which gives you access to the more flashy stuff. Now, I am curious about and have seen videos that the developer and stuff has posted of later game boss fights that seem a little more involved, but here in the early game, combat is very simple. If anything, enemies seem to mostly just be there to stand around and die, as they do very little. Either way, when it comes to exploration, there is a lot to do. Exploration seems to be, I would say, the primary gameplay device in addition to the action-oriented combat, because this is where all the challenges and I would say mostly quantity-focused content comes up. Now, there are side quests and things, and we'll see how that stuff pans out, but for the most part, it seems really basic and systems-based in terms of the actual content you are doing, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because there are a lot of those systems, so you at least get some diversity there for sure. Like, for instance, one thing you can do is start taking on bounties, which lets you actually track these people down, and you can even take them in alive by tackling and tying them up, etc. Now, you can be a criminal yourself, but this is an odd one. In order to steal from the different like shops and stuff you'll find around, you have to have a mask that you equip, which I thought was just a very strange way to handle that. There is like a bounty system that coincides with it though. And then there's the usual sort of assortment of different shops and everything to be found, mini games and different systems to engage with, like cooking, crafting, refining all your stuff, etc., etc. But a lot of it seems to revolve in particular around, again, exploring the map itself and then these challenges. Now, exploration is going to be aided by finding bells and fast travel points. So the bells around the map are going to give you basically a fog of war clear, which is going to make it easier to explore generally, but then once you get to a certain story point, you can start unlocking fast travel points around and just quickly zoom around the map in addition to all of your different abilities. And so tracking those down in particular is going to be a bit more of an immediate priority for me at least. That way I can do that and power up a bit while I grab some artifacts and explore the world at large. Now these challenges take all sorts of forms. A lot of them seem to be just things you have to do to open up sealed artifacts, and others seem to be like more competition and side quest based, like, archery competitions. There's a spear challenge that I found, that kind of thing. But I guess more than anything, as I move to review this, my hope there in particular is that some of the side content and quests you can get up to are interesting, because there are like factions and things to keep track of. There are antagonistic factions that can take over certain landmarks and things that you can fight back and take from them. So I'll see how it progresses, I guess, is my main point of contention, because then there is combat as well. Combat in the beginning is relatively basic, as you would expect, and there's your sort of main weapon set, and then you can equip a bunch of different types of weapons as well, like two-handers and things, and then once you get to play the other characters later, they have some different things that will come up as well. Now, I am just getting to the point in the game where you start unlocking a bunch of extra abilities, like the ability to glide, as well as this, I think they call it an axiom thing, but it's effectively like a grapple hook type situation that you can use to manipulate objects, but also can use it in combat once you get the abilities. That unlocks a bunch of movement stuff. You get this like force palm ability, which gives you like a big, almost like telekinetic push type of thing that you can use to like get airborne or push enemies around. And so basically combat is starting to open up. And I'm, again, very curious to see how that works in terms of its movement abilities, but also how it works in the later game, where from what I understand, bosses are a really big deal, but the guys on the ground kind of just generally acting as foot soldiers aren't exactly the most impressive bunch. But as I move to actually review this game, I've got a few questions on my mind, I suppose. For starters, is this game going to feel like a cohesive whole or a mishmash of a bunch of different stuff, as it at least looks to be at first glance when you start looking through all of it? The other side of that will be, is there any depth to these systems, and then do they feel rewarding to actually engage with? Is the story any good, etc., or is this going to wind up being more of a gameplay focused situation? And all of those questions and more are what I'm looking forward to, finding answers to for myself at least, because some of this stuff certainly has potential. But in terms of timeline, that is hard to gauge. Now, the nice thing about not starting until after the release date, basically, is that I'm going to be able to take advantage of the guides and everything that I would not have been able to do otherwise. So it, ironically, won't take me as long as the people who put in the work making those things. But I will say, plenty of those people have pointed out that this game is apparently extraordinarily large, and so that may well wind up taking me a good bit. I don't know exactly how long, but I do expect to be at this for a little while. My goal is to get it done by early April, but we'll see what happens. First impressions wise though, definitely some rough edges, and basically I just want to see if there's actually going to wind up being more depth to any of this, or is it going to be really more of a gameplay first sort of experience. That, however, is pretty much going to do it for this particular video. Certainly hope you're looking forward to the review when it drops, but in the meantime, certainly let me know how you feel about it down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.